Well, they did it again. Fate of the Furious somehow manages to be just as big, just as stupid, just as fun, and just as spectacular, if not more so, than all of the movies preceding it. I'm Jack Fitzpatrick, and this is my review of Fate of the Furious. So Fate of the Furious follows the Toretto gang as they're doing their usual criminal/superhero, kind of stuff. But then something happens that kind of changes the entire dynamic of the gang. And this is that Dominic Toretto comes across this mysterious kind of woman who has some sort of leverage over him, which makes him go against his family, his loyal family. Oh no. And he essentially becomes a bit of a villain in this movie. And, from here on, there's a bunch of MacGuffin kind of bombs, weapons, and other sorts of things that are all used as excuses for action set pieces. And that's really what this film is all about. And with that being said, I just have to say that this movie was pretty much exactly what it needed to be. Complete and utter and perfect nonsense. And something that really helped make the film be this way is that it had this fantastic understanding of what it was. It didn't try to convince us that this was an Oscar movie. It didn't try to be something that it wasn't. The tone was totally on point. And something that really helped set the tone of this movie is that it constantly kept breaking the laws of physics. Like, the world in this movie doesn't quite work like reality does. It's quite clear that this isn't the world that we live in. There was this one particular scene which was revolving around remote control cars, like life-size, people cars, which was just insane, and it actually topped pretty much every single other action scene from any Fast and the Furious movie that I can think of. I mean, maybe The Rock unbreaking his arm in 7 and Vin Diesel breaking the ground by stomping on it, and other ridiculous things like that were maybe just as ridiculous and fun. But if anything, I just have to say that some of the scenes in this movie, like this remote control one, was at least on par with them. So yeah, this film was full of over-the-top action. It wasn't really very reliant on realism, and it wasn't too fussed about coming off as silly. This film commits. So yeah, it's basically a soap opera with cars, bald men, and explosions, and it's not exactly a lesson in masterclass acting, but I do have to say that I did appreciate that there seemed to be at least some effort to add in a little bit of substance among the craziness. There were some actual compelling moments that were spread out throughout the entire thing, and there were even a few scenes of surprisingly effective acting. Vin Diesel showed a little more range than we've seen before. Michelle Rodriguez was actually pretty awesome in this one, and fine, even Charlize Theron proved to actually be a pretty menacing villain, despite the fact that she did just sit at a screen for most of it, spitting orders to her goons. I still don't understand the obsession with that particular actor, but the character itself was a fairly good villain, so whatevs. But the real stars of this, at least to me, were The Rock and Jason Statham. The Rock and Jason Statham's rivalry is the heart and soul of this movie. Speaking of the heart and soul of this film, though, unfortunately, I just have to say that I don't really think that there is much directorial influence on F. Gary Gray's part. It isn't very clear that this came from the guy that did Straight Outta Compton. Much like in the same way that I kind of keep forgetting that James Wan did Fast and the Furious 7, this was just quite obviously a very studio-ran film. I'm not exactly saying it's his fault, though. I imagine there isn't really much wriggle room to bring out your sort of specialty to these sorts of films. Anyway, while we are getting to some of the downsides of this film, I will say that there is some, sexist stuff in this, like in all of the other ones, and yeah, that bothered me a little bit. But really, it was actually pretty minimal. But I'm just saying there was some stuff here and there. But really, this was just a film that knew exactly what it was and set out to do exactly what it ended up doing. Fate of the Furious was a breath of fresh air, honestly, but not because it was something highly original or new, and not because it blew me away in terms of moving me or touching my heart. But a film like Fate of the Furious has this certain ability to just take me to another world for a couple of hours. A movie like Fate of the Furious lets filmgoers forget about their troubles for a sec and just have a really good time, logic be damned. This film delivered on comedic interactions between characters we've already come to love. It played as an introduction to a new phase of this ridiculous ongoing series, and it delivered on just the most insane amount of action you could even imagine. And I honestly love every minute of it. Now, this isn't exactly the kind of love that I have for something like The Revenant or La La Land. This isn't a film that I'd say is a necessity canonically. It's something that the cinephile in me would rave about in terms of cinematic quality, but you know what? Sometimes the critic in me just has to sit back for a sec, shut up and enjoy the absurdity. Fate of the Furious allows just that. I would rate Fate of the Furious a 9 out of 10.